Well, if you had told me 4 years ago that I would be sitting here on the Atlantic coast of Argentina with the wife that I married on the same trip, talking about finishing the Pan American Highway, I definitely wouldn't have believed you.
Yeah, can you believe that? We got engaged and married on the Pan American Highway.
It's wild. Hey guys, it's Alex and Meg here, and we are officially done the Pan American Highway. And we thought that we would do a little bit of a debrief session. Jinx. Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about our experience over the last 2 years, some things we learned, highs, lows, that kind of thing. And yeah. So why, from your perspective, do you think we decided to do this trip?
Well, essentially, we met and immediately moved into the van together and started exploring North America. We had done Canada, the States, and Baja twice, essentially, together. And I think we both have a thirst for adventure and travel and experiencing new things and pushing the limits of what we can accomplish together. And so I think after a few times in Mexico, we were kind of like, what's next? Like, what can we do next that's going to broaden our horizons and challenge us? Being from Canada, we're basically at the start of the Pan American Highway, so it was a pretty easy decision. We can just launch from home, essentially, and do this epic international overland route. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the Pan American Highway was just ripe for the taking. Seeing as we can more or less just stay on land and do this epic trip, considered the longest road in the world. Mm-hmm. And, if it's there, why the heck not?
Yeah. Alex has always wanted to do something epic like this, and I've always wanted to see as much of the world as I could possibly see, and so what better way?
Yeah.
So, after we started talking about it and kind of committed to doing the Pan American Highway, what did you think the journey was going to be like?
Well, I kind of live my life a little bit in the future, a little bit in the past. I try and stay as present as I can, but definitely when I look ahead to what my life could be like, it looks like a movie in my head. I'm a very visual person.
Says the filmmaker.
And I definitely, when I looked at the Pan Am, I kind of took reference images that I'd seen from friends and other travelers and made this narrative in my mind of what it would look like. And, I imagine myself doing river crossings in mud in Central America and standing on the top of volcanoes and doing jungly things and driving across epic deserts with big plumes of dust coming out behind our wheels and, sitting on the cliff sides like we are right now. And we definitely did all of that stuff. But it's interesting to me now knowing that when we were doing it and in it, it didn't feel at all like what I thought it was going to be like. And that is largely to do just because when you're in it, you are moving
in the good and the bad, and
yeah.
It's kind of like an Instagram versus reality.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally Instagram versus reality kind of thing. The reality of it is that if you're standing on the mountaintop, it's not like epic music and a drone circling you and stuff like that. It's no, I'm so tired because we're standing at 4,000 something meters and I can't breathe. And
we haven't slept in a week, or you're preoccupied with the thing that's broken on the van, or you're just thinking about the logistics of life. Be preoccupied with adult things, like wondering, oh shoot, are we gonna have enough time to get groceries or something later? We all in this day and age have this tendency towards looking at things on the internet and making up this fantastical imaginary version of what other people are experiencing, and imagining ourselves in their place. But when you're actually in their place, it's a lot different.
Yeah. It's a lot different.
Yeah.
Now, it's not to say that it wasn't epic and it wasn't amazing, but I think personally, this trip is going to be better looked back on. It's the nostalgia is going to paint it very rose-colored.
Yeah. When you're looking back, you forget all the silly little annoyances that fill each day, and you just remember, the epic vista.
Totally.
The epic route. Yeah, that you drove the length of the Americas.
Yeah, and I mean, it's already happening. Totally. Like, there's so many things that we're looking back on already. They're just like, they're so much more epic than we thought they would be.
When I was thinking about this trip, before we started, what I thought of Latin America that totally was not the case was just, I thought that we were going to be like in Latin America, in the remote wilds, where the only communities we would encounter were like small villages, when in reality, like, the population density down here is more than what we're used to at home, and there's cities everywhere, and there's access to all the same things everywhere. And so many of the like remote peaks that we ended up getting to were actually not that remote. There was like, farms just below, and so that was a little bit of my misconception going into it.
So all that being said, what was harder than you expected?
I don't know why I didn't expect this, because literally every road trip I've ever done, the worst part of it is worrying about the health of the van. And that's not just this van. That is literally every vehicle that you'll ever travel in. No
matter what year, make, or model.
Yeah, you can have a brand new car, you can have an old car that you know how to fix every part of it, or you could have a garage full of every spare part that you could ever need. You will still be so preoccupied with what's going on with your vehicle the entire journey, and it's going to take away from the quality of your trip.
Yeah, I think I'm inclined to agree. I mean, probably what was on my mind the most was the health of the van pretty much the whole time, and it started to get really bad when we got to Colombia, and we were that much further away from kind of that parts network, and we started to get into transmission issues, and from there it kind of took off.
Yeah. I think the travel that we have done prior to the Pan Am, we've always had like home within grasp, or the U.S. like within our sights. So it's always kind of been like, oh, like if something really goes wrong, like we're not that far away, like we'll be able to figure it out. And on the Pan Am, there's been like a way bigger question mark about that. Like, okay, we're leaving a city center where we're not even sure we can get the parts that we need if we do have a major failure, and we're going even further away. And so what could happen? That being said, like whenever anything did happen, we were also very conveniently placed to save ourselves. We never got stuck like out in the middle of nowhere. So there's also that. It seems like the universe is always kind of like helping you along, weirdly. So I don't think there was anything very surprising about our travels through Canada and the US, but as soon as we crossed into Mexico, what surprised you early on in our travels?
I think for me, how hard learning Spanish is, even though you're totally immersed in it. There's a few aspects of my intelligence that...
Not your intelligence, your learning, how you learn.
Okay. how I learn. That makes it very, very hard to learn
You're so
languages.
smart.
Smart and other things. But yeah, I had this pretty like optimistic idea that when we got to Latin America, I would absorb the language very
Just without even trying.
yeah, and that it'd be easy. And it turns out that it's not that way, at least for me.
Like, I had this rose-colored idea that I would become nearly fluent by the time we finished the Pan American Highway. I didn't have any expectation that would just happen magically. Like, my goal was to practice Spanish every day so that I could become fluent. I haven't tried to learn a language in, I don't know, maybe like nearly a decade. Back when I was like backpacking more, was the last time I had attempted learning languages, Spanish namely. So it's been a long time, and wow, was it ever harder to pick up that learning and practicing back up. But I didn't anticipate all of the other commitments that we have going on and responsibilities that we have going on, and how that would impact my goal to like continue learning on the whole trip. Mm-hmm. I found pretty quickly that working, producing videos, full-time travel, and all that comes with that made it so extremely hard to dedicate like an hour each day to learning a new language, and I very quickly became completely overwhelmed, and I couldn't keep up with my lessons, and therefore the only time we got to practice Spanish was when we were in towns, and it was like overwhelming and all at once, like you're trying to do all your errands in one day and learn Spanish, and yeah, so our Spanish still sucks.
Admittedly, yes. Yeah, like getting into Latin America, we were really well acquainted with your typical or van life day, right? Like,
just this lifestyle.
Just the lifestyle, yeah, sorry. What was surprising is how much more challenging it became as soon as we got into Latin America, because all of a sudden you're like, where do we go? Okay, I can't necessarily get there just by knowing my way around a place, and then we have to translate, and then you're thinking about finding a place to camp that night, and it all just becomes just that much more challenging. And if you haven't lived out of a vehicle before, you wouldn't understand errand days and how challenging they can be. And then you just
even in the Canada and the States, like we dread errand days just because it just takes up so much more time than you ever anticipate. You got to go from place to place. You have to find a shower, you have to find laundry and wait for the laundry, and then you have to find the grocery store, and maybe that grocery store doesn't have what you're looking for, or things just spiral out of control on errand days. And getting into Latin America, they are so much more out of control.
Yeah,
there are so many more unknowns you have to navigate.
You're just navigating so much more on top of everything else. All right, so moving away from the hardships of the Pan American Highway, what were some of your unforgettable moments?
I think for me, my most unforgettable moments on the trip are the moments where we were outside of the van experiencing things. So whether that was like a hike, like reaching a mountain peak, or a walk down to a crazy waterfall, some specific moments that really stick out are what was that huge waterfall in Mexico? Start with a T? It's in our intro, that huge waterfall in Mexico.
Yeah. Tamul?
Something like that. Tamil, yeah. I don't know.
I'll put it down in the bottom.
That was so cool. Like that was so hard to find. Like we wanted to go in the back way because we didn't want to pay, and we ended up finding it, and that was just so magical. Another one in Mexico that sticks out was when we hiked up Volcan Malinche. That was our first high elevation
Our first 14er.
Yeah, it was just so challenging and so rewarding, and one of those firsts that you never forget.
It was the first time that we really experienced big elevation. 14,000 feet is not anything to laugh at. And I mean, we started at, I think we started at 10,000 feet, but
Yeah.
You realize once you reach that 12,000 foot mark, you're like, oh, I don't have very much oxygen to breathe.
And it was just kind of like the first taste of high elevation.
And we were sick.
Yeah. Which the other thing that stands out to me on the trip is just like the existence at high elevation. Like, I think that maybe is like one of my favorite parts of the entire trip, just existing in the mountains, especially Peru. Like, I loved Peru so much.
Pretty much like everything above 3,000 meters or 10,000 feet was amazing. And it's like this little...
Even higher than that. Like,
yeah, but like you get up there in the Andes and then you kind of stay there, and it's like this little private world unto itself. And everything up there is kind of like a little bit more epic and feels more epic because it's hard to live there. Yeah.
Because you can't breathe. Yeah, it's really cool. Like, the communities up there are so incredible. The culture up there. And then, anything that you do up that high just feels like such an achievement.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was a lot of the like overland off-road routes that we did. Definitely what sticks out in my mind was like the Copper Canyon, the Bridges route in Colombia, the whole north of Peru, Paracas. Paracas, and then we did Lagunas and the Puna route. And I think that they all stick out to me because they are routes that, like, I looked at long before we started this trip and said, I want to do that. But then doing it in a two-wheel drive van,
there was always a question mark that we wouldn't be able to. Like, we set out on this trip with those off-road routes being like the goal, that we would be able to complete them, but we didn't know. Alex didn't know if the van was going to be capable enough to complete them. So every time we completed one, it was pretty special.
And like some of those routes, like they had different aspects of struggle to them. When we did the Copper Canyon route, like that was our first time in northern Mexico, and it's a well-known fact that whole area is kind of like cartel controlled, and so there was kind of that apprehension of like
the fear. It was fear. Like we were new, and we were like green traveling in Mexico. We were informed by the media, which now obviously we know better and we know not to listen to any of that crap. But there was fear there. We were like, what could happen?
And then we got down to Colombia and did the Bridges route, and that was hot.
That was a different type of fear.
Yeah, it was like, I mean, there was definitely the fact that we were driving across old rickety train bridges, but I think the struggle there was that we had just spent so much time at elevation. We had cooled off finally after Central America, and we went down and it just got really, really hot. And
that made me really, really grumpy.
Yeah, and it was slow. It was the humidity was high, and then we had fear sweats of like going across these bridges and just looking down to our death. And then the high elevation stuff, like when we did that pass in Peru, we barely made it over the pass itself, even though it was easily drivable, but we were just so high up that the van had no power. We had to winch, and then we overheated at the top. And I'm really finding that it's the struggle and the challenge that makes poignant memories. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's no surprise, but I love it. I love the fact that I can look back on those experiences and say that we did that. Mm-hmm. And like, we've already looked back on some of these memories and just been like, we're kind of crazy, a little bit stupid, but we're here and we get to tell the story. And I just like, I cherish that so much, that we can tell the story. Mm-hmm. I look back fondly on the time where we were on the Puna and we were near the end and we got into that deep ravine and we couldn't really get out of it. And then finally we adjusted the road just right. We hit it at the right speed and Betty just crawled through that. And then we got to the top, and the elation that we felt after that was absolutely intoxicating. And I will never ever forget that feeling. And then when we finished the actual route, when we got out to the river below and then drove out to the pavement, the sense of relief that I had that entire day, that was the last like intense gravel route that we were going to do with Betty, and that I didn't have to like deal with the stress of planning these routes anymore.
That's what Alex feels most alive about.
Yeah.
Not stressing about off-road routes that we didn't actually have to do in the first place.
But anyway, I felt really alive on those kind of times, and honestly that's like a feeling that I will chase for the rest of my life.
Great.
So good. Some more off-road routes for you, babe.
Lovely.
Great. Okay, let's talk about the lows. What were the hardest times?
When Matt and Stacy passed away. Hands down.
For both of us.
Yeah, that was the hardest time.
We've talked about it a fair amount at this point, but we'll reiterate the fact that we learned of the loss of our friends in a country that was not our own, so far away from family, living out of a van, like no community around us whatsoever to help deal with that.
Leading up to it, I think we were actually, maybe that is like part of something memorable and feeling alive, is when we reached the high elevation mountains in Colombia, we finally felt for the first time in months like we were in a place that we could really enjoy, like we were finally finding our footing. We had finally arrived to the Pan Am that we had dreamed of. And, a week of that feeling had passed, and then we got the news. And it was a devastating moment in our lives because of how good we were feeling and then how quickly that feeling left. But also, what Alex said, just like being completely alone out here, no support system, nobody to share in the experience with. Like, it was just so brutal. And I would say that that's the only time on this trip that we have actually considered stopping.
Quitting and going home.
Yeah.
We were really seriously thinking about it. We were still in Colombia. We could just go right back to Cartagena, stick the van into a container and ship it back home. Mm-hmm. And maybe we would continue later. It was rough. That was so friggin' hard.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't keep my eyes from leaking for like a month. Like, what I held on to the most throughout that time was like, we'll get a fresh start when we leave Colombia. That's like the only thing that got me through it. I just felt like as soon as we entered into Ecuador, we could get a fresh start and hopefully get our feet back under us. I just felt so emotional and like untethered and unable to cope with the trip anymore. And that really tested our relationship. Like, we got into some conversations during that time that were really hard. I think typically, like, in our relationship, like, I am like calm, grounded, can handle anything that comes at us. And I think that was the first time that you'd ever experienced me not that.
Yeah.
You like, at one point Alex had questioned, like, I don't know, like, if you can do this anymore. I think he said that to me. Like, I don't think that you can handle this anymore. And that was, obviously we had a fight about that, but.
Yeah. I'll speak to the mechanical aspect of the trip. It was once we got into Colombia and we started to notice the transmission starting to fail. Like, we got definite signs of it right near the end. You know, we've been in South America for 10 months now, and that entire 10 months we've had a failing transmission.
Yeah.
And this is like...
At the beginning, it was like...
Yeah, it was like freaking out. And this is totally new ground. Like, for me personally, I've never driven an automatic vehicle for very long anyway. I had one other, but it was a Toyota automatic transmission. But this one is, you know, this is totally new ground for me. I've always had manuals, so it's just like gears. You know, I can comprehend gears, but when it's multiple clutches and oil pathways and solenoids and computer control modules, it's like a whole different ball game. And the transmission is kind of like a bit of a Pandora's box.
All we knew going into it was that this is a particularly strong.
It is.
That is 100%.
A fact. That's the only reason we are still driving.
Yeah.
Luckily, we have good people back home, namely Errol. Errol has been a massive help to us. He deals with these transmissions often enough that he knows kind of their characteristics. Lance, my buddy back home, who has been really helpful in answering questions, and Wes, who has also, you know, like, given us advice on many a time. And so those three guys in combination have been like our mechanical knowledge backbone. So thanks to all of you guys for helping us out.
But yeah, when we first realized, we were like, what the hell? That was the other like moment of the trip that I was like, shoot, like, are we gonna have to end this trip?
Yeah, we were like looking at rebuilding the transmission in Ecuador, and I don't know like what that would have involved, how much that would have cost us, but I was looking at it being like, this is an expense that could end our trip. Like, that transmission rebuilds, importing parts, so on and so forth, like, that gets really expensive really quick. And
like, it's one thing, the theme throughout has been like, we're gonna sell this van at the end of the trip. And so it's one thing if like Betty was our forever vehicle, we would have invested in it that way. But knowing that it's not your forever vehicle, investing like 6,000 USD, like something like that, is a really tough pill to swallow when you've got, you know, 6 months of the trip left and you're going to sell the thing at a huge loss at the end of it. It's like, ooh, are we really going to do that? Yeah. But Errol, our friend Errol, like, every new code we've gotten, every time.
Errol, what's this code? What's P0741?
Yeah, every time something new has happened and we've freaked out, Errol's been like, don't worry, just send it.
It'll make it.
It'll make it. It'll make it. Betty's going to make it. Just go for it. And we have just gone for it, and it's been fine. Yeah. So, yay. On to a little bit more. Actually, this whole video has been pretty personal, hasn't it? What do you think has changed in our relationship throughout this trip?
Well, I would say that, like, having started the trip pretty much 2 years into living in the van, we were already pretty good problem solvers, relationship-wise. But I think that this trip has definitely improved that. We have really learned the value of not sitting on bad feelings. I'm still kind of bad at it, but I'm getting better. And we kind of just like get into stuff and tackle it as quickly as we can, because we live in 45 square feet. And we never can get away from each other. Yeah, and we rely on each other heavily for different things. And it sucks when we're at an impasse and mad at each other, and it's just not good for the whole team spirit. Yeah. I guess. Yeah, it's kind of tricky to answer this question though, because 6 months of knowing each other, we moved into the van together and have been traveling somewhat internationally ever since. So this trip is, although more intense in Latin America, this is all we know.
Like, all we know is this van and being with each other 24/7, owning a business together. So yeah, I don't know. It to me, it doesn't feel like anything has changed in our relationship on this trip. But yeah, I think that we've been able to fine tune how we were already operating because it's been so intense. We're like confident in that we can handle anything.
Yeah.
So piggybacking off of that question, what did we learn about each other on this trip?
I have become very well acquainted with how much your health situation affects your life.
Situation meaning being a woman. For anyone that's confused about that.
Being a woman. I guess this is probably just like any growing curve of an adult man and a husband. But being in a van in such a small space, like I have to be cognizant of Meg's health and her cycle and how that affects her. And I realized that like Meg, or the average woman, deals with stuff that I will never have to deal with, and does it with poise and composure, relatively speaking. I've had to learn how to give her grace, patience, understanding, and
also be a good boy when I need him to be a good boy.
This is actually self-preservation. But yeah, I mean,
don't piss me off today, honey.
Okay.
Can't deal with it.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm still learning. I'm still getting better at this. But yeah. I've really had to... I've learned that like what Meg does while she is going through
crazy
hormonal stuff, her cycle, like what she's able to accomplish and do just shows me that she is so much stronger than I am.
Correcto.
Yeah, and I've really, really learned to appreciate that fact. And I'm still learning how to appreciate that fact. So
way to go, honey. A+.
I answered correctly. Therefore, I will not die tomorrow.
For me, I mean, again, this is a hard question to answer because we've always lived this way. So I always kind of knew this about Alex. But on this trip, everything has been amplified. So I would say that for me, what I've learned about Alex is just how tuned in to the vehicle he is, and like just how much he's paying attention to every little thing, almost to a fault. Like, I mean, I don't think we would have made it to the end of the world if it weren't for this, that Alex is so incredibly tuned in. But at the same time, I also think that we have probably done too much to this van, maybe unnecessarily, replacing parts that didn't need to be replaced, and
debatable.
Doing fixes that maybe caused a problem in the end.
Oh.
Anyways, yeah, it's pretty amazing to travel with somebody that knows so much and that can do so much with the vehicle, and for that I am very grateful. And I feel like I have pushed you, and I have learned about you that you are so capable and can really do anything with regards to a vehicle, and so that's pretty cool. Jack of all trades, right?
Master of none, but often better than one. How would you say you are different after this trip versus before?
I would say that before we embarked on this long-term international trip, our lives had been fairly easy. Manageable.
Yeah.
We both knew going into it that this was going to be a serious challenge. Things were going to go wrong that we never thought we'd have to face or solve. I would say that on this trip, we have pushed the limits of what we are both capable of and what we're capable of as a couple. And before we left the US, I had questions about what we were capable of. Like, can we do the Pan Am? Like, are we going to be able to pull this off successfully? It's like a huge endeavor, and I just didn't know. And now I know. And I know that whatever we have planned for the future, that we'll be able to
Do it.
do it.
Yeah. I think for me, I've expressed this before as well, that like my worldview has changed drastically. I think that I've learned that we are incredibly lucky and very blessed to come from where we come from. And I've learned to appreciate where we live, Canada, and seeing like how good we have it. And I don't say this to gloat or boast.
But
I come from the point of view of that, like, I've heard a lot of people talk about the issues that Canada has. We've had a lot of people talk about how, like, oh, you don't want to come home. Canada is going, into the toilet. And I really don't think so. I think that where we come from is pretty great, and everywhere has its problems. Canada as a country is lucky enough to have significantly fewer of those problems.
Yeah. I think it's easy to stay home and get caught up in all the little things that are wrong with where you live. Like, whether it's like how the medical system works, how much taxes you're paying, et cetera, et cetera. But I think being away from home for this long and traveling through the developing world has just given us such a huge appreciation for where we get to call home. And we just cannot wait to go back. Like, landing back on Canadian soil is going to feel so amazing and so surreal, and we'll just never take it for granted again.
Yep, 100%. So
yeah,
that I think is probably like the biggest and most notable change that I think we've both experienced on this trip.
Yeah. What has this journey taught you?
With a will, there's a way.
If there's a will, there's a way. With a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
The saying is, if there's a will, there's a way.
Okay.
Right?
Thanks to all you wills out there. You make things possible. Yeah, I like, as annoying as the truth of that statement is, it's very true. If you apply yourself, there is a way through. And
with the right mindset. Like,
yeah. The average person is plagued with doubt. And I think that this trip has made us doubt ourselves less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're obviously saying this from a very privileged perspective. Like, we won't forget that. We come from loving families. We've always had enough. And so with that comes this confidence that we have that we always knew, but we have learned even more on this trip. But yeah, if there's a will, there's a way. We know that we can do anything that we put our minds to at this point.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good feeling.
Yeah, one of the other huge takeaways from this trip, and something that I think we've gained wisdom on through a lot of feedback that we've gotten online, is that there are things that we do not enjoy as a couple. And that is okay, and we can avoid those things. Like, we can give ourselves permission to not do it. Namely, I think maybe some of you that are tuned in might know what I'm talking about, but that is existing at the equator. We do not like high humidity, high heat jungle. We don't like it.
And that is okay.
And that is okay. Everybody has permission to like that environment, but we have learned on this trip that we don't like it. And so we will not put ourselves in that situation going forward.
Yeah.
Because we are adults and we have the right to choose. And yeah, just like giving ourselves the permission to like, if there's something that we don't want to do, we don't need to do it. And we don't need to struggle just for the sake of struggle.
Yeah. Before we left on this trip, I was all like, yeah, I want to learn how to struggle. I want to learn how to be challenged, and I want to invite challenge into my life and invite struggle.
There's just some struggle that's not worth it.
Yeah, totally. There's a whole litany of different kinds of struggles that you can invite into your life. And there's just some that I can look at now and be like, yeah, nah, that's good.
Good on that.
Yeah.
Good on jungle for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. So after the trip, what do you think matters to you more?
I think what matters to me more, and like what's become very clear on this trip, is just how much we love where we're from and what a privilege it is to get to return to there, and that all of our loved ones are there as well. Like, I think we have such a greater appreciation for what we have, and that what we have, like in this tiny van, is enough, and we do not need more. And so like, we're not going to go home with a consumerist mindset. We're going to really make sure to cherish like the little that we do have and try and carry that through.
Yeah, I think that like our footprint on this world, maybe we're like a little bit more conscious of it. You know, like what matters to us is keeping that footprint small. And having enough. Like Meg said, this is enough. We don't need any more. Yeah, I think that like recognizing that very little is enough for us has been like a pretty cool thing to come to. So yeah, that's what I got to say about that. So final question. How does it feel now that it is over?
The first word that comes to mind is relief. Honestly, I think we're both very relieved that we did it, and we can close this chapter and we can return home and have a moment to rest and recuperate. But the other thing is proud. I feel really proud of us.
Yeah, I like those words. Relief and proud. I think for me, like, just like when we were in Ushuaia, it hasn't sunk in yet because, like, we are still in Argentina.
We're still struggling tooth and nail to get out of this trip, but
we still have 2 weeks left in the country.
Hopefully only 2 weeks.
Hopefully 2 weeks.
Stay tuned.
I think just subconsciously my brain is not allowing me to experience relief. I am very proud of having completed this. But I think the relief will come when we either board the plane or set foot on Canadian soil once again.
Well, also once we have a clear answer of what's happening with the van. Like, once we have cash in hand and we watch Betty drive away, relief.
Yeah.
Would you do it again?
Yeah, I would totally do it again. I would do it differently, but I would do it again. This trip is probably a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing, but
would do again.
Yeah. It's been amazing.
Yeah.
So that's that. I know a lot of you probably have some questions about what comes after this, and I can assure you that there will be answers. We are still trying to get home, which means getting to Buenos Aires and then flying out, and then we're gonna have to get kind of resituated back at home for the foreseeable future, but we will be releasing a video kind of announcing our plans, which we have been making for quite some time. Our patrons know all about that, and we're gonna tell the rest of you in due time, so stay tuned. We're not finished making videos. A lot of people seem to think that, and I've made a few posts about it, but
I don't know if you guys know, but this is our job.
Yeah, this is actually our full-time job. We are making money from YouTube.
We would have to get normal jobs if we stopped, so we won't stop.
Yeah, we're not doing 9 to 5 again. Okay, If you made it this far,
Congrats.
congrats. You guys rock.
Sorry if we rambled.
Thank you for everyone still watching, for your dedication and your interest in whatever the heck we're doing, for your support, and for just like following along and being interested in what we're doing. And I'm really happy that we are making things that are interesting, that capture people's interest and intrigue and inspire people. That's a really good feeling.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for being here.
We couldn't do it without you.
Yeah. All right. Let's drive another 500 kilometers. High five.
Gosh.
Mwah.